Mochi donuts and cinnamon rolls. These are two extremely popular kinds of sweet treats, with both of them having their own distinctive features. Mochi donuts are chewy and soft, while cinnamon rolls are known for their warm cinnamony flavor and fluffy texture. So what happens when you try to combine this fusion of East and West into one recipe? Hey, Seraphin here, and in this video, we've turned a mochi donut recipe into the base of a cinnamon roll recipe. In case you haven't heard of them, mochi donuts, as they are generally known, were first popularized in Japan, where they are called pondering donuts. Shaped in this distinctive ring of 8 balls, these donuts eventually became famous internationally, experiencing a massive boom in popularity. But despite the mochi in the name, the original mochi donuts don't seem to contain any real mochi or glutinous rice flour at all. The original donut chain that popularized the pondering donut actually attributed the chewiness to tapioca starch. So you might wonder, why did they come to be known as mochi donuts then? Well, some have attributed it to the fact that mochi in Japanese can also be used to talk about the texture of a food. Mochi describes a soft and chewy texture like mochi, and if you check the original Pondering Donut site, you can find that they directly call the texture of the donut mochi. If I freely translate it, this part literally says the popular mochi texture. Seeing this, it's not too hard to think of referring to these donuts as mochi donuts. We have a previous video on mochi donuts already on this channel, so do check it out if you'd like to try making them yourself. That recipe is also what we're using as a base for this cinnamon roll recipe. With these rolls, we're aiming to preserve that mochi texture, so these mochi cinnamon rolls have got all the best parts of a cinnamon roll with that warm flavor and soft, fluffy texture, but at the same time, they have an addictive, light and chewy mouthfeel to them, like mochi donuts. It's honestly even better than it sounds. Now, we couldn't just take a mochi donut recipe and immediately make cinnamon rolls with it. There are some key differences in the methods that need adjustment. One particular issue I ran into while making this recipe was the dough consistency. You see, the mochi donut dough requires a fair amount of water to ensure a soft and light result. This is part of what causes the dough to become extremely wet and sticky, which is okay for donuts. But for cinnamon rolls that have a pretty extensive shaping step, that's a problem. If we use the usual method of making the dough, we kind of have to choose between a really sticky bread dough and soft cinnamon rolls, or a nice dough that makes hard cinnamon rolls. However, we're using a different method to get the best of both worlds. We're making a dough that's lower in hydration and a lot easier to handle, but during proofing, we're going to pour in some milk into the baking pan to raise the hydration. When we bake this, we get perfectly soft and moist cinnamon rolls without the hassle of dealing with a sticky dough. I will be clear that this was inspired by a viral hack on TikTok for cinnamon rolls, although that hack called for heavy cream instead of milk. You could use the heavy cream if you wanted a much richer bread, but I found milk to work just as well in giving us a soft and flavorful cinnamon roll. Okay, while we've just talked about adjusting the method we use to make the dough less sticky, another adjustment that we made to the original mochi donut recipe is in the amount of tapioca starch. Originally, we used a blend of 40% all-purpose flour and 60% tapioca starch to make the dough. For our current recipe, though, we're lowering the amount of tapioca starch and increasing the amount of wheat flour. One of the most important things that this influences is the overall gluten content. Gluten is what makes the dough elastic and easy to work with. So with this adjustment, the dough will become much more cohesive, less sticky, and it should also result in the cinnamon rolls becoming fluffier because the gluten is also what retains the gas inside the dough. And while we talk about gluten, we're also switching from using all-purpose flour to using bread flour, which has a higher protein content and thus higher gluten content. This is done in part to help remedy the addition of tapioca flour, and also because we are using Tangzhong in this recipe. The Tangzhong or Yudane methods call for making a slurry of boiling hot water mixed with wheat flour. When we do this, the heat and water cause the starch granules inside the wheat flour to swell and eventually explode. This process is what's called starch gelatinization. When we add this slurry to our bread dough, there are a lot of benefits we can get. The most well-known benefit is that the bread stays softer for longer, but it's not the only one. Other ones include a dough that can be frozen for longer, a slightly sweeter bread, higher water retention, and a more mochi texture, which is perfect for this recipe. We have a few videos on Tangzhong's benefits as well as more on the science behind it, so be sure to check it out if you want more information. Along with the adjustments mentioned above, we're also making some minor adjustments to the amount of other ingredients, such as the sugar and the butter. Please note, though, that even if we're using less sugar compared to the original recipe, this is still a sweet dough, which is why we recommend using a yeast meant for sweet doughs if you can. You can, of course, use a regular yeast, but you should be ready to wait for a little longer for the dough to rise. Okay, with all this out of the way, let's get into the recipe. This recipe makes 6 large, fluffy cinnamon rolls, which we're baking in a pan with these measurements. We're not using a pre-ferment for this recipe because it is an enriched dough with a lot of flavor already built in. Additionally, this is meant to be a relatively simple and quick recipe, so we're not doing any more steps than is necessary. Do check out my other cinnamon roll recipe if you'd like to make the rolls with Polish and Tangzhong. In terms of special ingredients, this dough calls for tapioca starch as mentioned, and we're also using a little bit of vanilla essence. This is optional, but it does really round out the flavor. For the filling, we naturally need cinnamon, and since I live in a country that produces a lot of cinnamon, here are a bunch of large cinnamon sticks. They smell amazing. Fun fact, cinnamon in Indonesian is kayu manis, which literally translates to sweet wood. Okay, to start the recipe, we're going to make the tangzhong, and this is best done a day before we make the bread dough so that the amylase enzymes inside the flour can break down the gelatinized starch into simpler sugars. So we've got a bowl on top of a scale, and we're going to pour in the boiling hot water. Immediately adding the flour to it right after. We then mix it all together with a spatula. The flour should very quickly become a solid lump. That's how it should look. It means that a lot of the starch has been properly gelatinized, which is exactly what we want. After we've mixed all the flour into the hot water, we're going to clean the sides of the bowl and then the spatula before setting it aside and covering the bowl with a silicone cap. This is going to keep all the moisture in, and we're going to leave this tangzhong to cool to room temperature before putting it in the fridge to rest overnight. On the next day, we're going to start making our bread dough. We've got all the ingredients measured out on this table, and we're ready to start mixing them together. First, we add in the tangzhong using a spatula to scrape it in. Then we add the milk, as well as the egg, just 1 large egg. After which we add the vanilla essence. Again, it is optional. I just think it's a nice touch. We toss in the sugar next, and salt, tapping it in. We'll now stop adding ingredients for a second just to mix it all together and break up the tangzhong into smaller pieces. This should take no more than a minute. Then we can continue by adding the tapioca starch, along with the bread flour, dropping it in. Before finally adding in the instant yeast and giving everything a quick mix with the spatula. If you've watched my video on yeast, you'll recognize that we're adding the yeast onto the dry ingredients to prevent the instant yeast from coming directly in contact with the liquids. This is done to help the yeast better survive the rehydration process, so make sure to follow this step. When the dough has a lumpy texture like this, we're going to clean off the spatula with a scraper on both sides and then bring it to the stand mixer. We'll put it in and let the mixer run for about 3 to 4 minutes at a medium speed. We're aiming to combine all the ingredients and also develop the dough's gluten before we add the butter. This dough isn't extremely sticky, so it is still entirely possible to knead this by hand if you'd prefer. The kneading time can vary depending on your strength, so it'd be best if you go by the way the dough looks instead of the time. When the dough looks like this, we can stop the mixer and add the butter in with a spatula. Then we'll turn the mixer back on, setting it on medium speed again, and we'll let it run for another 5 to 6 minutes. With this dough, we're aiming for what's called full gluten development, which just means we want to fully develop the gluten, bring it to its strongest point in one go. Because of the butter, the dough will look like it's falling apart at first. That's not an issue. It'll eventually come back together. Although you might want to keep a spatula handy to scrape down the sides in case any butter gets on them. Now, when the dough comes together, as well as starts cleaning the side of the bowl and eventually the bottom of the bowl, that's our first sign that the dough is almost done. To make sure, we can stop the mixer and do a quick window pane test. Gently stretching the dough out so that we can see light through it. As we can see here, the dough passes, so we can continue. If your dough rips easily before it gets that thin, you might want to let the mixer run for another 2 minutes before testing it again. Okay, so we'll continue here. We're now going to oil a glass bowl and our hands. Don't need too much oil, just enough to coat everything. Then using a scraper, we scoop out the dough, getting every piece. Rounding it in our hands, making a neat little bowl with a smooth surface. Finally, place the dough into the lined bowl. And to prevent it from drying out, we cover the bowl with a silicone cap. We'll now leave this to rise for about an hour or until it doubles in volume. This timing is dictated by your room temperature, so make sure to keep an eye on your dough. While the dough is rising, we've got a few things to do. First, we're going to make the filling. So in a bowl, we've got our butter, which has already been measured and left out to soften to room temperature. To it, we're going to add in the brown sugar and cinnamon. Mixing everything together with a spatula. We're using dark brown sugar here for more flavor from the molasses, but you could use light brown sugar if you wanted to. You can absolutely adjust this filling to your preference. You could add more cinnamon for a stronger flavor, or more sugar. You might even want to throw in some nuts to add a bit of crunch, anything you'd like. And after we've mixed all of this together, we're going to set this filling aside, and we now want to line our baking pan. With a silicone brush and a non-stick coating, we'll brush the pan with the coating, making sure to line every corner. You could use butter instead, it'd serve the same purpose. After lining the pan, we'll set it aside, and when the dough is done rising, it should look like this. Just look at how puffed up the silicone cap is. That's a good sign of yeast activity. We can start shaping the dough now. We'll uncover the bowl and punch the dough down, fully degassing it. Then we move the bowl to the side, remove the silicone mat, and dust the work surface with a bit of flour. We'll take out the dough, and now we want to just knead it a little bit, getting rid of any gas as well as building a bit more gluten strength. We'll only do this for less than a minute. Then we can stop, and now we want to roll the dough out into a rectangle. So we have a rolling pin here and a ruler. We're aiming for this side to be about 24 centimeters wide, and we want the height of this rectangle to be about 40 centimeters. We're also using a bit of flour here and there as needed to prevent sticking. Remember, we need to roll the whole thing up later, so it's best if we can prevent the dough from sticking to the work surface, of course. when the dough has been rolled out into a nice and even layer, we're going to add the filling. We found that dividing it into portions and adding those portions across the dough make for the best way to first distribute the filling. Then we can just evenly spread the filling out with a spatula. We'll take the time to make sure we get a nice and even layer across the dough. It's definitely important to make sure the butter is fully softened here. You don't want to try spreading cold butter over a fragile dough. This is such a fun part of making cinnamon rolls to me. It's so nice to see the blank space get filled up. Now, along the end of one side, we're going to avoid covering that part of the dough with the filling because that is where we're going to seal the dough. So no filling after this line. Okay, once we've added the filling, we're going to start rolling up the dough. We want to start on this side, making a first fold over, just a little fold to start with. Then we can continue rolling the dough up, taking it slow and steady, trying to roll it up neatly and evenly. If the dough sticks to the surface at any point, you can loosen it with a scraper and continue. Once it's all rolled up, we're going to measure the dough with a ruler, and using the marks as a guide, we're going to divide it into 6 with this large bench scraper, just cutting through the dough. The key is to move quickly, just a straight cut down and continue. Then we'll place the rolls into the baking pan that we lined just now. I will note that although this dough is pretty easy to handle, it is a bit higher in hydration than many other cinnamon roll recipes, so it can get a little sticky and look a little slack like here. The hydration is what makes the resulting cinnamon rolls extremely soft and light, but it's also what makes the dough look like this. So between the taste of the rolls and the dough's appearance, we're prioritizing taste and texture here. But don't worry, after proofing, the dough looks a lot better, and after baking, it looks amazing. Once all the rolls are in, we're going to pour in the milk. You want to do this slow and steady, covering the tops of the cinnamon rolls as well. Then we cover the pan with some cling wrap. We're going to let the dough rise for another 45 minutes or until they almost double in volume. Again, this depends on your room temperature, so adjust the timing based on how the dough looks. While the dough rises, we're going to preheat the oven to 180 degrees Celsius. When the dough is done proofing and the oven is ready, we're going to bake the cinnamon rolls on the bottom rack at 180 degrees Celsius for 25 minutes on bottom heat. And then we'll switch it to top and bottom heat, letting the rolls bake for another 10 to 15 minutes or until they turn golden brown all over. Every oven is different, so make sure to adjust these settings to your oven. After that, the cinnamon rolls are done. These rolls are best eaten while warm. They do stay soft for a while, but really when they're fresh out of the oven, these rolls are amazing. We've decided on some really simple toppings here. We're just brushing the rolls with some butter, makes them nice and shiny. Then we're covering them with some powdered sugar. You could use a simple glaze, of course, but I think the flavor of these cinnamon rolls is already so good, perfectly sweet, so I recommend trying them without anything first. They're just that good. Now, since we bake them uncovered here, we've got a deliciously brown top on our cinnamon rolls. I think it adds a lot of flavor due to the Maillard reaction, and the slight crispy texture also adds to the mouthfeel. But if you'd prefer a softer texture and a lighter color on top, you could bake the rolls covered. With that aside, the taste of these rolls is truly unmatched. They have that mochi texture and that incredible cinnamon flavor. In the making of this video, I probably baked like a batch every day, never got bored of it. And that's it for today. Thanks for watching, and bye!